Hey everyone, this is James, bringing you another Italian film review. Again, going to be talking about the movie Spasmo. This is from Giallo January, so it's a Giallo film. For this month, I've seen a ton of Giallo, so I just decided to go back and revisit some familiar ones. I wanted to watch a couple different Lenzi films, working on a project for that. And so I decided to watch the last two Umberto Lenzi Giallos. So those are Spasmo and Eyeball. And the interesting thing with Lenzi is, unlike a lot of directors, he didn't just do 2 or 3 Giallis within the span of 1971 and 1972. He was doing Giallis before The Bird with the Crystal Plumage came out, and he did some after as well. So you could sort of see the different influences and the patterns and things like that that happened there. And so the interesting thing about these two is that they are very, very different from one another. And after The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, a lot of Giallis really followed that very characteristic pattern, the thing that we all associate different Giallos with, the kind of black glove killers. And so Eyeball very clearly falls in that pattern. Seven Buns in Orchids does as well, but Spasmo notably does not. And in that sense, it's very much like a Zag, where everyone else is kind of doing the standard zig, very much in that kind of Argento, but before that blood and black lace mode. And so Spasmo is kind of fun in that sense, and I could see it being a little disappointing if what you want in a Giallo is that very, very kind of constant, just we're going to get a big set piece every 15 to 20 minutes, and those elements are helpful in something like Eyeball, preventing a really low floor, because at least sort of like a slasher, you're going to get kind of these nice set pieces, even if you find the rest of the film very ineffective or dull or something like that. And so this film, I appreciate that it's trying to do something a little different. So in fact, Spasmo was originally supposedly a Lucio Fulci project, and I can totally see it, because Fulci is someone whose, I think, best films, certainly coming around 1979, 1980, 1981, were really heavy at atmosphere, is very good about those elements, and cared a little bit less about the plot. And the plot here is frankly ludicrous. But for me, at least, that's not a reason to necessarily dislike this Giallo. I don't think this Giallo is top tier or anything like that, but I do find it to be quite enjoyable and fun to watch. So why should you watch this one? Well, it's ludicrous, and it's a somewhat unusual Gialli that is very much focused on the psychological. That's far more focused on the psychological elements than the kill count. Okay, so. Yeah, in my opinion, Gialli doesn't necessarily have to be in kind of this Bird with the Crystal Plumage, more kind of this proto-slasher mode. So for me, at least, I like that it doesn't get overly fixated on the different slasher elements. It definitely has a little bit of a lower body count, and I think the pacing ends up being a little bit more uneven than something like Eyeball as a result of kind of following more of an unusual pattern, and so I admire it for that. Certainly an odd one for Umberto Lenzi, who I think strengths really were in just not holding back when it comes to directorial. So if you wanted someone that was really willing to put it all out there and just go full tilt, shameless filmmaking, Umberto Lenzi was pretty good at that. And so I think a lot of people might regard him as a bit of a hack, but I find a lot of his films to be very watchable. I'm not sure if I love any particular Lenzi films, except I do tend to like his Poliziotteschi's, I think, a little bit more than his Gialli. Nevertheless, this one really does stand out as being quite interesting. He does have a couple other interesting Giallis that are not in the Bird with Crystal Plumage mode too, because he made them before that. So things like a couple of the Carol Baker collaborations that he did with her. So let's see. This film, the lead is Robert Hoffman, and I think he is probably one of the main weaknesses of this film. He's no Tony Musante or anyone like that. He's a little bit of a weaker lead. I was just reading the Troy Holworth review before this, and So Sweet, So Perverse, so what's it called? So Deadly, So Perverse, that's right. The Gialli book that he did, Volume 2, and he said that he alternates between smug and constipated, and frankly, it's not inaccurate. Robert Hoffman is not necessarily a very dynamic actor. I think he's actually better than he normally is there, which isn't to say all that much there. Nevertheless, we have some great familiar faces. Susie Kendall, who is always a welcome presence in Gialli. This is probably her third most well-known one after probably Bird and Torso. And then Ivan Rasimov makes some appearances towards the end, and he's one of those guys that I always enjoy. I'm always glad to see him. He's usually kind of around more in like these 15 to 20 minute roles, and that's the same here. But he's nice. It would have been nice to see him take more of the lead there. Where I think this film really excels is kind of in generating the different atmosphere and the cinematography that's going on, as just these great dreamy kind of Mediterranean settings. And I think it's probably one of Umberto and Lenzi's most impressively shot ones. It really, really looks quite good. I like the nighttime photography. I like the daytime photography. Just some really, really great locations. And for me, that sort of Italian flair and those different locations are a big reason why to watch this. So you can really get some great shots of the coastline and the different castles and things like that. A couple other things that are very much kind of like of the Italian 1970s, don't really see these happening anywhere else, are like the mannequins, which supposedly were a very late addition, according to Holworth at least. And so we have kind of this reoccurring theme where these mannequins are appearing and someone is just stabbing the crap out of them. And it's just kind of, it doesn't, is it necessary to, not necessarily, but it's just one of these great visuals. And it is one of the main things that I remembered about this film is just kind of the different mannequins. There's some shooting home video, which was clearly lensed by a professional lenser. It's just funny how people don't actually show the home videos that would be home videos. So it's like way more handheld or something like that is what you would expect, rather than like kind of zooming into close-ups and seeing people's reactions and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are just ludicrous about this film that's very, very typical of kind of this time period. There's a really, really nice Ennio Morricone score that adds kind of like a tinge of sadness to it. Yeah, weakness-wise, I do think it's a little bit poorly sustained. The middle act in particular, it does tend to drag a bit, but I think the beginning and the end at least heat up, and we just get, there's enough going on, at least for me to thoroughly enjoy the film. Who won the film? I'd probably give it to Lenzi, actually. I think this is like one of those efforts where I'm like, wow, Umberto, he really did a pretty good job on this movie. And there's not necessarily a lot there to go off of, whereas like sometimes I think the base material really helps a lot. For instance, I think Ernesto Gastaldi's writing on something like Almost Home and Tomas Million's performance really might be bigger contributing factors to the success of that film rather than Lenzi's himself. So I think in that sense, this is one of Lenzi's best directed efforts. Not necessarily saying it's his best film or anything like that, but I think it's pretty solid. And I would kind of group it with a good chunk of his Gialli as like very, very enjoyable to watch. Not necessarily great films, but solid enough. So for me at least, that is a 7 out of 10. So solid. So thank you all for tuning in. I will see you all next time.